world moves fast. Your workday? Even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
Hey everybody, welcome to the 100 songs that defined heavy metal. I am Brian Slagel. I am your host. I am the CEO at Metal Blade Records, which for the last 42 years has been home to bands like Slayer, Amon Amarth, Cannibal Corpse, Gwar, Fate's Warning, Killswitch Engage, and Metallica. This episode, we're going to talk about the great Metallica song, One. As always, our great friend Martin Popoff will give us some history on the song. Then we will talk about the production of the song with another good friend, Jay Ruston. And lastly, we will talk about the song itself with a fan and a very good friend of mine, who you may know from being on Chopped as one of the judges, Chef Chris Santos, or one of his amazing restaurants, by the way. He's going to talk about this song because he's a massive Metallica fan. So it'll be fun. You know, obviously, we're going to talk about a few Metallica songs throughout these episodes. But when I asked Chris which one he wanted to talk about, we're talking about the classic stuff, that we'll get to, Creeping Death or, whatever they are. But he mentioned one, which I thought was really interesting because it's not a song that I would go and say, well, for podcasts like this, that's the song we should do. But when we were talking about it, it really is kind of interesting because of several things. Number one, it was the first video they ever made, which is pretty insane. Number two, it's one of their most iconic songs. And it came out in 1989, which is kind of when that whole, metal was changing and grunge was happening. And it's a really fascinating song when you think about where it lies in the Metallica landscape. So I think it's gonna be a lot of fun to delve into it this episode. So we will do that, and I'll hand it over to my good friend, Mr. Martin Popoff.
Martin Popoff here with a little background on Metallica's One. So essentially what we have here is a super famous song for Metallica. In fact, so famous that it won the first Grammy Award for Best Metal Performance, the very first one. And this was like the third and final single from And Justice for All. So as a bit of a background, of course, Metallica essentially invents thrash. I've got a whole thing where I talk about how they invented metal as opposed to heavy metal. With Kill 'Em All, we go through Ride the Lightning, we go through Master of Puppets, and then they make this difficult album. It's a double album. That's how I always remember it because I bought it on vinyl and it was two pieces of vinyl. And Justice for All, which is, famously very extreme recording with not very much bass. It's very clacky. It's very, very high-end, very histrionic sounding album. This is the band's most famous song from it. It's a harrowing, harrowing story of a World War I soldier, arms, legs, jaws. He can't speak. He has to message an SOS code. Please let me die. All this sort of stuff. It's a scary, scary story, and the video makes it even worse. It's interspersed with the Johnny Got His Gun footage in there, and there was a whole brouhaha over royalties to do with that. But yeah, the video makes it even scarier. It's just a very depressing, creepy song. The interesting thing about this song that I've always found cool is that, Metallica proves that they're different essentially by inventing thrash, number one, but then by the incredibly elevated songwriting you get on Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets. They also are not afraid to propose a new kind of thrash power ballad. They're kind of the inventor of that with Fade to Black. And so as we get up to this album, this is that song on this album. But just like a lot of their other material when they do mellow stuff, it's got proggy, super thrashy, heavy bits, super rhythmic bits. So this is an absolute epic of a song. It's long. The album version is 7:27. There is a radio edit at 5:02. Released as a single, it was up into January 10th, 89, so the following year. Diamond Head B-side for this. You get the Prince on it, right? But one thing I always found amusing about these Metallica ballads is I always describe it as it sounds like they're recorded at a sound check because they make no real truck to to having ballad type instrumentation. It's still Lars's big boomy hockey arena drums. It's still guitars, full on distortion pedal, all that sort of stuff. James can sing, but even when he sings, he's still throaty, gruff James essentially. So you notice that with these ballads, it's basically the same arrangement. More or less as when they do a full on thrash song sort of thing. So I always thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, this is a super famous song, gets played live all the time. It's kind of the song that made them famous and set them up for the massive success they were going to get with the Metallica album, the Black Album. So yeah, produced by Flemming Rasmussen. Again, immediately you get that feeling that this is an album that is going to be talked about in terms of a production sense, because it is so incredibly radical. And I've often said that even the drum sound on here kind of sets up the Vinnie Paul drum sound in Pantera, where you get, he definitely has a trademark sound. Is the first thing you think of when you think of Vinnie Paul is what he does on Cowboys and Vulgar with Terry Date. And I feel like, unwittingly, and people don't really talk about this very much, but I feel like some inspiration for that drum sound must have come from what Flemming and Lars accomplished on And Justice for All. So there you go. One creepy song, super famous song. Even the Grammys recognized it.
Thanks, Martin. As always, lots of really interesting things there. So one thing that he mentioned that I should probably talk a little bit about is the Grammy thing. So as you all may or may not know, but the first time Metallica was nominated for a Grammy, they were there, they performed, everyone thought they were going to win. So we're all sitting there waiting for them to call Metallica's name. I was there, obviously. And all of a sudden we hear Jethro Tull. We're all kind of looking at each other like, wait, what just happened here? This is bizarre. So I think it was the Grammys at that point were not very young, the voters, and not very metal oriented at all. So because of that whole fiasco, they invited me to host and chair a committee to basically make sure that whatever comes through that category is the right song for that category. So I chaired that for quite a long time. I was also one of the board members of NARIS for a while. NARIS is the company that does the Grammys. And I did that for quite a long time until the politics got the better of it, and we kind of got back to songs that shouldn't really be in that category winning awards. But that was pretty funny. But they, of course, as Martin mentioned, this was their first ever Grammy. So another really interesting part about this song. So, and we will get into the production part of it as well, which Martin brings up. And that's always a hot button topic when it comes to this record. We'll get into that when we talk to my buddy Jay Ruston about the production on this record. Welcome, Mr. Jay Ruston. How are you today?
I'm great, Brian. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thank you very much. So the song we're going to talk about today is an interesting one. And I kind of talked about it a little bit in the opening, where we're going to get to a bunch of Metallica songs during all these episodes of this podcast, obviously, because if they're not the biggest heavy metal band of all time, they're certainly in the top 3 or 4. But the easy songs would be to go to the classic stuff, which we'll get to. But Chef Chris Santos, my good friend, and your good friend as well, your neighbor, actually, I think you can walk to his house.
Yeah. I can, yeah.
He's a massive Metallica fan, and I wanted him to do one of these episodes. And I asked him about what song, and we kind of went back and forth, and he mentioned one. And I think that's really interesting for a variety of reasons. First of all, as Martin Popoff mentioned when we were talking to him earlier, this was the first song that Metallica won a Grammy for, which I think is really kind of fascinating. I kind of forgot about that a little bit. So that's historical. Also, it came out in 1989. This is kind of when, the whole grunge thing was just about to happen. And, this has become this huge iconic song. It's the first video they ever made. But of course, you can't talk about this album or this song without talking about the production. And that's kind of where we talk to you about. So give me your thoughts.
Well, maybe you'll be surprised, maybe you're not, but I actually love the way this album sounds. Am I bummed that the bass is inaudible? Of course. But it doesn't take away from how incredible the album is, how amazing the playing is, however many zillions of edits and chopping they had to do to make it happen. The fact that they made this record on tape in 1987 or 1988 is incredible. And I just always loved it. And I was late to the game of Metallica. When this came out, I was, 15 years old. And I had cassette handed to me by a guy in high school, and he was like, "You got to check this record out." And I'd heard of the band, but I was still listening to like Zeppelin, Van Halen, Scorpions, Rat. I hadn't got really into like more metal. And I heard this record and it just changed my life. And so that being said, then of course when the Black Album came, I noticed the production, massive production shift. And then of course I go backwards and I start hearing the previous records and discovering their older music and realizing that Master Puppets was so brilliant and very different sounding production. But I'm reading the back going, but it's the same producer. It's the same recording studio. What's different? Because they did this at One-on-One in North Hollywood, same as where they, spent a year doing the Black Album. And of course, mixed by Steve Thompson and Michael Barbiero, correct?
Yes.
So the drum sound, let's start there. The kick drum sound, the bass drum, defined what became a standard kick drum sound in metal. Up to this point, kick drums were aggressive. They had some point on them, but this was like another level of EQ and attack on a bass drum that just never stopped happening after that. Like, that's how kick drums have to sound in metal. The dryness I don't love, but again, it's a choice that was made and it makes the record kind of scary sounding and super tight and heavy, which is clearly what they wanted. I like the guitar sound. I think the guitar sound is fantastic. It's very scooped, obviously, doesn't have a lot of mids, but when it's aggressive. And the lack of bass as a bass player, I find a bummer. So a couple years ago, when I got my hands on the multi-tracks, or more or less stems, it was like stereo tracks of each instruments, probably for a video game or something, I did my own remix where you can hear the bass. And the bass drastically changes the feel and the sound of the record. So on one hand, I understand the choice, but on the other hand, it wouldn't have made it a worse record to hear the bass. Absolutely not. Even in 2 or 3 dB louder, so it was somewhat audible. And there are a few spots on the record where you can actually hear him. But like in Blackened, in the middle section, when the lyrics are repeating themselves, you can hear the bass playing like different notes than the guitar and stuff. And it's actually really cool and artsy. But, he recorded the bass by himself with the assistant engineer and nobody else around. So, maybe that was part of it as well. But his bass tone is fantastic. His playing is fantastic. I now love listening to my bass versions so that I can hear what he's playing. And especially in this song, the little moves he's doing in the cleaner acoustic parts are really nice, and it actually makes the song better. So that part is a bit of a bummer.
I find it a fascinating record. First of all, I love it. I love it a lot. I'm a big progressive fan, and this album is their progressive metal masterpiece, pretty much, if you ask me.
Yes.
When you listen to the production, it didn't bother me at all. I mean, clearly you realize like there's not a lot of bass on this record, but when you listen to it, the guitars are so low and heavy, and the kick drums are so big and bassy. There's not a lot of room. Like you add bass into there, and it's going to make it muddy. Like those tones are going to change. But the story that I've heard was that when they're mixing the record, James and Lars are both in the studio, and they're very competitive over their sounds when they're in the studio recording things. And this is back before Pro Tools. So, the fader goes up for the guitars, and then the fader goes up for the drums, and then the fader goes up for the vocals. And they keep kind of competing with each other, trying to make them both selves heard. And there's nobody moving the bass
Right.
knob, so it just kind of didn't exist. But clearly, they realized their mistake or lack of mistake as they went out the next record and like, we need to make a record that sounds great. They got Bob Rock, and the rest is history for that. But same thing. It's like, and I've heard your mix, by the way, which is really, really good. I've heard a few other mixes with the bass, and it is interesting, and it does make it cool. But like we've talked about before, you just get so used to the original sound of it that anything different is like, it's really good, but I still want to go back and listen to the original sound. But the funny thing too about Metallica is they've had so many records with sound issues, and they're still the biggest heavy metal band of all time. And these records are still sold millions and millions of copies, even though, there's 3 or 4 records where there's production issues on.
I can't think of a band that has had more production snafus than this band. And it's it's not like a slight against anybody they've ever worked with, because everybody they've worked with has been totally capable. I just think it's what you said. There's like some competition there and some arguing and stuff, and things just end up sounding the way they sound. And I think Master Puppets for me captures it the best. But Injustice for All, with 2 or 3 very slight adjustments, could have been a perfect record. A little more bass, a little more ambience on the drums, and we would have been good, you know? Literally a perfectly mixed metal record. So it's not like it's that far off. The hate for the sound of it and the whole production, I've never understood, because other than, if it's like when somebody says to me, oh, this mix isn't right, something's wrong, it's usually one little thing, like the snare drum isn't right or the vocal isn't right. You get that right, all of a sudden they're like, oh, this is brilliant, everything sounds great. I think that's what this record suffers from.
I think it just shows you the brilliance of Metallica, that they can make a record like this where if it was almost any other band, people would be like, oh, that record's not good, or people wouldn't be into it. But it's such an amazing record that the production, while it's not perfect, isn't such a big detractor that people don't go, oh, this is like one of the best records of all time. And you made a really interesting point about Lars's drum sound, and he's an easy target. I get it. Metallica's an easy target too, and I'm constantly defending them and defending him for various things. But for whatever reason, I don't know why it is. Again, maybe he's an easy target, but people like get on him for not being a great drummer. Where I beg to differ, because he's one of the most unique drummers, not only in metal, but just in music, where so many songs are around the drums. Like you can't really say that in too many other bands, like especially on this album and Justice for All. Dunk, dunk, dunk. The whole song's written around those tom beats. And one
Yep.
with the kick drums, and those kick drums, like those
Oh yeah,
those
iconic.
yeah, those songs are built around the drum sound, which is really, and the playing of the drums, which is I find really fascinating. And you see that throughout their career when you kind of sit down and listen to it. It's like, oh, I mean, I know he arranges the song, so I'm sure that has something to do with it. But still, you've got to be able to play those parts and think of those parts and basically build songs around drum beats, which is not easy to do.
I've never understood the attacks on Lars. Anytime you're going to get this big, you're going to get attacked. But Lars is a brilliant musician. And I say this as like a big picture. He's like Jimmy Page. Jimmy Page sounds like he has a broken finger when he's playing guitar, but that doesn't matter, because he wrote amazing songs. He produced all those Zeppelin records, and he wrote all those gazillions of guitar tracks that make all those songs so magical. Lars is exactly the same. He envisions a sound, he envisions the record, the songs. James is coming in obviously with the actual song, but then Lars is clearly sticking his fingers in it and turning it into something. And as you just said, building the drums around it. And to me, he's like one of the greatest arranger, producer, co-producers in metal, because I know he's heavily involved. You can just tell. So I never got that. And you're right. He's one of the most inventive original drummers. And so many metal bands exist because of him, like so many bands before them existed because of Kiss. And it's the same thing.
Yeah, 100%. So, and I always like to stand up for him, because again, he's an easy target. I get it. And yeah, anytime a band is this big, you're always going to have detractors. But they've had detractors going all the way back to Ride the Lightning. When that record came out, I would love telling the story. So when that record came out, all the original Metallica fans, the hardcore, this is our band, we love them, to make Kill 'Em All successful, hated Ride the Lightning. Hated it
Wow.
because there's an acoustic guitar on there. And the nickname for that album for a lot of these kids was, they called it Ride the Light Bulb. I was like,
Wow,
what?
I did not know that.
What are you guys talking about? It's my favorite Metallica record. So it's easy to have just detractors about stuff. But this album I find really fascinating, though, because the production element aside, it's one of those records where I find, like, there are people that can say, I mean, Master Puppets is probably one where there aren't a lot of detractors, but there's still some people that go like, This record, though, for whatever reason, maybe because a lot of people came in, this was their first Metallica record, maybe because of the video and the band was getting bigger, but there's a lot of love for this album. I don't see a lot of criticism about this record that much, other than the production in it.
Well, certainly. And when they play these songs live, I think it's a magical moment for me personally, maybe because it was my first discovery of the band. And I've read countless interviews about this record just out of curiosity. And there's 2 quick stories that come to mind. One is they started with Mike Klink,
Yep.
and got 2 songs in or something and abandoned ship and got Fleming back. And James always just said it just didn't work out. I never really got any details beyond that. Maybe you have some. And then the other is back to your bass story about the faders. Was James in an interview with Fleming? Actually, he said, as far as he knew, they told Steve and Michael during the mix, okay, turn the bass down, turn it down. Okay, we can barely hear. Okay, now turn it down 3 more dB. So it's like, okay, no wonder we can't hear it, you know?
Yeah, and you know, there's a lot of psychology behind that as well. You know, it's the first full record they made without Cliff, and you know, Cliff
Mm-hmm.
was such an integral part of that band and the recording process and
Mm-hmm.
everything else. So there's certainly some of that as well. I think it's just a combination of, you know, what we talked about today, where, you know, Fader's not going up, Cliff's not there. You know, they're more interested in, you know, their parts than Jason's parts, and yeah, it is what it is, but it's still a classic, iconic record. And as always, I cannot thank you enough for coming in and talking about it. It's a really interesting one because the production is so unique.
Yeah, very unique. But like I said, I do truly love it, and I'll listen to it later today.
Uh, I will probably be doing the same thing as well. Well, thanks again, and we will see you next episode as well.
Sounds great. Thanks, Brian.
Año nuevo, los mismos Extra Value Meals en McDonald's. Ahora te puedes llevar 2 snack wraps y papitas y una bebida mediana por solo $8. Solo por tiempo limitado. Precios y participación pueden variar. Los precios pueden ser más altos en Hawaii, Alaska y California y con entrega.
So we welcome in my good friend. You know him from Chopped, or maybe one of his restaurants, Beauty and Essex in Las Vegas, New York, or Connecticut, or Tao, or his new partnership with the band we're going to talk about today, Metallica, who's doing Metallica burgers and fries at the upcoming Metallica events next summer. Chris Santos, how are you, sir?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm out of breath from that intro. It's quite.
And that was only like half of it too, which is
I know
pretty
exactly.
cool.
Well, I didn't want to go on and on and on. So,
Yeah.
so anyway, you know, we're talking about Metallica one song today, and I mentioned earlier in this episode that, you know, we're going to get to the other big Metallica songs, and you would think you would go out with one of those songs first.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted you in because you're a huge Metallica fan, and we were kind of talking about which songs we were going to use. And it's like, you know, we do that, something old, and then you mentioned this song, One, and I thought, oh, that's actually really interesting. So I'll let you explain why you picked it, but I think it's very relevant to the title of the show.
It's not a song I go back to over and over again these days. Obviously, I mean, it's that, you know, I've been as you have. I've been traveling all over the country, watching their shows over the last couple of years on this No Repeat Weekend tour they've been doing, and they always play this song, and it always gets obviously one of the biggest crowd reactions, and it's a fantastic song. But kind of went back to it in preparation for this, and it really brought me back to when that video came out and that song came out. And so there's a bunch of reasons why I chose it. First of which, I think, being when you look back at Metallica's history now, you can kind of see the direction they were pivoting towards with this song, particularly from that record, right? And I think that you started to see some of the, you know, obviously some of the more melodic and slower kind of stuff, you know, not acoustic, but, you know, that kind of vibe coming in with the song. But also what really happened, I think they really exploded, obviously, with the Black Album and Enter Sandman. But this song, I don't think any of that happens without this song. I think this song introduced the band to so many people because of that video, which was just, you know, you couldn't turn MTV on at the time and not have this video on, right? And it had all that footage from Johnny Get Your Gun, and it was very groundbreaking visually at the time. I just think it becomes one of those songs where you go, well, wait a second, yeah, of course, there's, you know, all the amazing tracks off Master of Puppets and I mean all the records really, but this I think this is that song that kind of becomes the bridge between their beginnings and where they eventually ended up and are today.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting song because it's the first ever video they made, which was, you know, they held out a long time before they made a video. So that's kind of groundbreaking there. And it's a terrifying video. The song is terrifying as well, but the video is equally terrifying. You're right. It was all over MTV. And that was kind of, even though they were pretty massive at the time, this was the next step to get them to that next big level. Plus that song itself. So first of all, it came out, right? It was right before, you know, kind of grunge took over and metal had to kind of reinvent themselves, including Metallica. And so it had that point in time where it was really, you know, they were obviously hitting at all levels. And it's such a really interesting song. I was talking about it with Jay Ruston earlier when we were talking about the production, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point here. But What's interesting about the song is, and this is what makes, we kind of went on a whole tangent about, I don't know why people give Lars a hard time about his drumming. He's a phenomenal drummer.
Yeah.
And he does something in this song, and really so many songs, where the songs revolve around the drums, like that whole.
Yeah.
That's like the signature part of this song, and that's what everyone remembers. And or Justice for All, like there's a song built around dunk, 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 3 tom hits. And I don't recall really very many drummers in really any genre that can do that. And this song is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, so that's funny, right? I have multiple comments about what you just said, because I think Lars really just does get his reputation is curious to me, because he's clearly a very good drummer, and he gets, I don't know why he gets so much shade. Is he the best drummer, in the world, or the best drummer in metal? No, of course not. But he's certainly very, very good. And when this song came out, that the double bass becoming, the double bass drum becoming part and parcel of kind of like every metal band has to, it's the part of their starter kit today. And so that part in the song where that just that little part that leads into the thrashy part, like, as simple as it sounds now, and as basic as it might sound now compared to what a lot of drummers are doing today, that was like kind of new and exciting, and everyone was freaking out about this drum part, And then the other thing that I've always sort of admired and also have said at times about Lars is, I can't think of a drummer that uses just the snare drum as effectively and as differently as he does from song to song to song. And he does that in this song too, with that. And like, that is a classic kind of Lars drum riff right there. But it's not just Lars. You get the classic Kirk guitar solo in here. You get that, the beginning guitar part that I think was probably more driven by James. It's got every part of Metallica all in one song, which probably explains why it's over 7 minutes long. But of course, a lot of their stuff has been. But again, also for this video to have taken off the way it did, with the imagery that it had, the lyrics that it had, and the length of the song, was kind of unheard of at the time.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, this was a lot of people's gateway to Metallica, like on the broader end of things. Obviously, everybody knew who they were, and after Master of Puppets, it was really big, and it's also it's the first album without Cliff, and so there's the whole sort of thing, which I think there's a lot of different angles to that part of the story, but I think that they wanted to try really hard to make a really good record, and I think that they did. And it also, you're right, it is kind of the gateway. And look, they had long songs before this, but really ever since this record, aside from the Black Album, which doesn't have a whole lot of long songs, but everything after that, they've gotten into the 7, 8, 9 minute songs, which I love that stuff. That's like the Parchment on New Iron Maiden record is 13 minutes, and I love every second of it. So I like that stuff. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting gateway song, and still one of their most popular live songs to this day too.
Like I said, even on the recent shows that I've seen, it gets, as soon as they start that guitar line, that ding doo doo doo, the whole place goes fucking bananas. You know what I mean? So it goes to show you just how how relevant the song has become, how it's stood the test of time. And I think that you can hear how it's influenced other bands, but I think this song directly influenced their sound going forward. This was a song from Injustice specifically. I feel like most of Injustice was still rooted in the Kill 'Em All, Master of Puppets, Ride the Lightning, Metallica, and this was the song that was taking them to the Black Album and beyond. And again, like I said, just going back and kind of listening to this again and watching the video again, I really, more than ever, I was like, yeah, this is, you can totally see where they were heading, for better or worse, because a lot of people don't like the direction they went into with the Black Album. And I'll be honest with you, Black Album's never been one of my favorites, but I've grown to appreciate it over time. But this song could have easily been on the Black Album and fit perfectly.
Yeah, and I think again, this was the first having a band this heavy and in heavy rotation at MTV was a huge thing because you have a lot of kids who are like metal fans, but not just more casual than anything else. And seeing a bunch of people up on it on MTV that look like them and playing this really heavy song, I think that's, like I said earlier, that this was a gateway for so many people who were like, wow, this is really amazing, and these guys are awesome. And it kind of definitely grew their audience big time. I remember that tour was the first really big tour they did where they're doing multiple nights in arenas, and it was pretty insane. And this song, yeah, I think if you talk to, I don't know what percentage, but a lot of percentage of like younger bands or bands that kind of kids that saw this when they were 9 or 10 when it came out, it was massive influence to them to want to start a band and to want to do heavy music. And that's kind of the songs that we like to talk about on this podcast because it does absolutely define heavy metal.
Yeah, and I think its presence, its presence on MTV at the time, I think was so big for the genre in general, and was so influential for so many kids to discover metal and get into it in a way. And that's why I thought that this song was really appropriate specifically for this list, because I just think, without this song getting that heavy MTV rotation, like who knows how many bands out there or notable metal musicians would even be out there if they hadn't gotten hooked on this particular song at that particular time. And I really think it's a true thing. Side note, but I was reading that, and I didn't know this. I just learned this. They it goes to show you what a monster Metallica is in general. It was airing so much on MTV because it became such a huge hit and was airing so much. Metallica kept having to pay royalty fees for the usage of the movie. So instead, they just bought the rights to the movie.
That makes sense.
I didn't know that.
But that's a funny story, and that's typical Metallica. By the way.
Yeah, right.
We'll just buy the rights to the movies. It's all fine. As awesome. So we haven't touched on the one kind of always talking point about this particular record is the production. And Jay and I obviously went down a deep hole and talked quite a bit about it. He was interesting. He's a producer and he's very opinionated on what he likes and doesn't like about records, and bad mixes drive him crazy. But he kind of didn't mind the mix on this record. I'm the same way. I mean, look, it's a bummer that there was not a lot of bass on it. And, we kind of discussed previously, what allegedly had happened in the studio. But what was your opinion on it when it came out and kind of your feeling on the overall production?
Well, I mean, they're kind of known for curious studio choices at times.
Well, up until this album, though, they really hadn't, because the first few records sounded pretty good. And, I mean, obviously limited budget on the first two, but they sounded pretty good. And, the EP they put out right before this had a great production and sound. And then this was the first one of many to come where there's issues with the production.
I have mixed feelings about it. I mean, I think that I've now, in the age of technology and social media and everything, I've heard quote unquote what it would sound like with the bass turned up, kind of a thing. And, who knows what a mix would have sounded like with the bass turned up. Of course, I think it sounds a little bit meatier and heavier with a little bit more bass. And so I think the record sounds a little bit thin, a little bit compared to their previous works, but not this song, which is interesting. Not this song. When one kicks into the heaviest part of the song, it feels as heavy as anything they've done, I feel like. I personally don't feel like you're missing the bass in this part of the song. I do think there are other songs on the record that clearly could have benefited for a little bit more bass, but over time, I've come to like the sound of the whole record. I don't listen to it today and think, oh God, it's not I don't think of it anymore. It's just what it is, Does that make sense?
100%. And, we kind of talked about that. Like Jay said, he actually did a mix because he was able to get the stems and do it. And we talked about the fact that people just like the original mix of something. Like I've gone back and wanted to remix stuff that we've done or stuff that I did way back when with limited budgets. And we've done a couple of those things, and literally just fans just don't care. They're like, no, whatever, however the original sounds, for good or bad, that's what they want to listen to. Yeah. And this one I don't mind because the kick drums are so thick and loud and bottom endy. And so is the guitar that I think that if you would have added a lot more bass into it, and I mentioned this earlier, we're talking to Jay, is it would have been pretty muddy. So it kind of made sense on a couple different levels why that was the case. But it's always interesting, and like I said, you talk to some people and they go, "Oh, I can't listen to it because there's no bass on it. It's terrible." And other people go, like, "I don't know, I like the record. It doesn't really bother me." And I'm kind of in the it doesn't really bother me that much category as well.
Yeah, if anything bothers me about that record's mix at this point, it's actually the snare drum. Again, it's really tight. It's a really, if you think about like the Shortest Straw or some of those other songs, it feels like that the snare drum it's just so tight and almost has like an echo effect. But he's experimented with snare drum sounds, as we know, over time, and I think he's in a good place today with what he's doing.
Yeah, spoken like a true drummer, by the way.
Yeah. It's funny. We were talking about Lars as a drummer earlier, and how he kind of has a weirdly earned, bad reputation. I will say that there were some videos that floated around that showed him playing this song and that double bass part, and how over some of the years it kind of got slower and slower, or whatever. But that's been rectified for sure, based on what I've seen the last 4 or 5 shows. He's back to doing it. If anything, he's playing it faster than on the record than before.
Yeah, James recently in an interview said that he feels that Lars is playing the best he's played in a long, long time. So I mean, look, everybody gets older, and I had this after the first Dallas show, Metallica Pantera show. I went and hung out afterwards with Lars and King Diamond and Charlie Benante and Carla Harvey and all. I don't know, there's like 7 or 8 of us. So we're kind of talking about both Charlie and Lars saying, like, I don't know that we can do this for a whole lot longer. Like, it's not like the Stones where, it's they're not doing crazy double bass and, all this sort of stuff. And they're both kind of talking about how, like, even Lars, I mean, he's got to get to the gigs like 2 hours beforehand, because he's got to get massages and all this stuff just to get him to the point of being able to play a 2-hour show at that level. I mean, look, those guys are almost, I think James just turned 60, and Lars is, I think he turned 60 this December, if I'm correct. But yeah, I mean, and same with Charlie, he's getting up there too. And they're just talking about like, maybe another 10 years, and it's not that easy. So, but he's clearly made a commitment. And I know talking to him lately, he feels a lot better, and he's taking a little bit better care of himself in terms of, just everything because you have to. I mean, these shows are important things. Like all those guys do.
It's hard, right? Because it's hard to think that you can get up there and play this style of music, in your 70s. But and the same token, and it seems like it's happened quickly. But it seems like 50s and 60s are like being in your 30s and 40s now.
Let's hope so.
Yeah. But, you think about, like, I mean, I don't know how old Paul Bostaph is, but he's got to be in his mid to late 50s, and playing the Slayer stuff and the Kerry King stuff. And at that age, I think the only way to, like, I think it would be hard for a band like Metallica to go away for 5 years and then come back and pull the stuff off. I mean, maybe they could. Like, you really can't say that Metallica can do anything they want, but I think continuously playing, continuously touring to some extent is the key. I think, just don't let it wear off, because it would be so much harder to get it back when you're 70 years old, to play some of this stuff,
I mean, look, Nico's still doing it for Iron Maiden. I mean, I know it's a little bit slower, but he's still doing it, and he had a stroke, and he's coming back and still playing pretty well. So you never say never. Look, it's not super fast and heavy, but some of those songs have some difficult parts to them.
Yeah, I mean, what Metallica has going for them at least is they have, although again they're playing a lot of fast stuff on this tour, but they've got such a huge, they're such a huge catalog now that they could play well into their 70s and just tailor the set list to things that aren't going to absolutely destroy Lars,
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, look, they don't have any plans to retire anytime soon, which is, I think, good for all of us out here that are huge fans. So we'll have to see how long it goes. And they're James likes to limit the shows, so I think they do 50 a year. So that's a good number, and I think keeps those guys in a good spot. And look, if they could do 50 shows every year for the next 10 years, I think we'd all be pretty happy about that.
Yeah. They're already booked next year. It looks pretty good. They're going to be doing some festival appearances, headlining a couple of festivals. They're doing their no repeat weekends again. I mean, at this point, I don't even know that they have to. And the no repeat weekend, I think, is a great way for them. They could do that for forever, right? Everyone loves it. It's a different set list, and it's interesting. And it's great to see them opening up with stuff off like Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning, and just right from the get-go of the set, you know what I mean?
Well, they've never really forgot those early records, even in the kind of the quote unquote dark days of Metallica when they were doing Saint Anger or whatever. They'd still go
Mhm.
out, and 90% of the show was all stuff from the first three records. So
Right.
they've always included all that stuff in there, which is really good because I mean that's what makes them in such an interesting band, is that like here they are. I mean, arguably the biggest metal band of all time, and certainly one of the biggest bands in the world right now. And if you counter, I mean, you can pick any big hard rock or metal band. I mean, a lot of them don't do stuff from their early records, even though that's
Mhm.
people want to hear that.
Mhm.
And they do. They every show. I mean, there's stuff off of those first three records, at least three, four, or five songs, which is amazing. Because
Mhm.
I was happy that I just saw Judas Priest and they did Stay in Class, which was really awesome. But they
Oh,
don't do a lot of super early stuff other than Victim of Changes. So Metallica does that. And they still, I mean, look, their last record was super fast and heavy, which also is kind of going back to their roots, which is something they don't really have to do. And I have a lot of respect for that.
yeah, and they were playing a lot of stuff off the last couple of records as well, live. So they're mixing that stuff in as well, which I love. They're kind of leaving that middle period out, but I guess I understand.
Yeah, but you know what? They'll pull out. I think I don't know. I can't remember. One of the shows I went to, they pulled out. I think it was in Dallas. They pulled out something from Saint Anger. I forget what song it was, but something or other. I was like, oh, cool. I actually like a couple of those songs on that record, so it's kind of fun. They pulled that out.
Yeah, I don't remember what song it was either. Whatever song it was, I remember James introducing it as the songs from your favorite album, and it was something
Yeah, yeah,
about Saint Anger.
exactly. People are like, what? What is this? But they can look. They can do anything they want. So more power to them. I love all that.
Yeah. But getting back to one, it's interesting that from what I recollect, that video was always just the right, it was 7 minutes long or whatever the record was, but the radio edit for that song was cut by 2 minutes. So at the time when that was receiving heavy radio airplay, the radio track was only like 5 minutes and 13 seconds. So they shaved like
Oh,
two
wow.
minutes off it, which is
I
interesting.
vaguely remember that.
Well, some of it's that intro, right? The intro to that video is very long and
Yeah.
can be cut off.
Yeah, that was when radio was very much like, I don't care who you are, 5 minutes to them at that point was long.
Right.
So it's a little bit different these days. And it was different in the early days where, stuff, huge, long songs. I mean, people play 2112 and
Mhm.
the whole thing is crazy. Well, cool, man. I really appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, of course, man.
Great song. Thanks for picking this one. I think it's a really fascinating one, and certainly, like I said, relates big time to the title of the podcast. And thanks again. I'm sure we'll see each other soon, and you may end up back out here for one of these songs down the road as well.
Love it. Let's do it.
Big thanks to my buddy Chris Santos for joining us. Also, as always, Jay Ruston and Martin Popoff. Huge thanks to producer Christian Blatt, and also to my good friend Lizzie Borden, who has provided us with our own intro music. So thanks to everybody. Thank you guys for listening to this, and we will see you next episode.